The last eruption was in 1708. Why would the government come out and fund a full study for a volcano that hasn't erupted in 300 years plus? Unless they know what I'm talking about and others are talking about with these repeating cycles that the volcanoes erupt on these same grand solar minimums.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
So anyway, the report goes on. It is a shocker, absolute shocker. They had the Ryukyu University professors come in and give their assessments on it. They had the cabinet office give the assessment. They brought all governments in to talk about the assessment. They brought people in from every single government agency to add into the report. Now, this is really strange that they would put this much resource into something that hasn't happened in 300 years. So the report comes out at the very end, and it's very stark, and when you read it, it would be a copy-paste pretty much everywhere. The report issues said that even 4 inches would render almost all roads impassable in Tokyo. It would shut down all railway networks. It would clog all drains, and any exposed machinery, such as air conditioning units, would cease working and bring the city to a standstill, including air ducts, air intakes. This air conditioning is on commercial units that you see at the top of large buildings, as well as home units. That's 4 inches. They're talking up to 3 feet. And on a 3-foot ashfall, everything stops. Now you got to realize with Chiba included into the Tokyo totals, we're talking almost 40 million people. The ports would shut, the railways would shut. That would turn that country into a third world country as well. If Tokyo and Chiba ceased to operate, just cease, they couldn't, there's no way. Where are all those people going to go? And you know how it is with high-rise buildings. I don't know how many of you live in high-rise buildings, but you got to have AC because there's just no way to get a lot of airflow coming through. A lot of the buildings, too, the taller ones, you can't even open the windows. 4 inches of ash blowing through the air. Are you going to open your window and then put a fan to try to draw air in there? So it seems that the Japanese government is also very aware of what's about to happen. Come back to what I was talking about with the agriculture in your local town or city. And think if there was an eruption. We're going to do a little mind experiment here. Now think if there was an eruption in Mount Fuji, and it did drop, let's say, 6 inches of ash. We'll just go a little more, easy to half a foot, a little more than 4 inches, but way less than the 3 feet that they predict as well. 6 inches of ash comes down over Tokyo and Chiba, and we're only going to use those 2 cities. There's other periphery cities as well that are going to be affected. Where could those people go to? You'd have 40 million people with no means of fresh air, no means of delivering any food into convenience stores or supermarkets, no way for them to get out because everything would be shut in. Literally, they're talking about all roads impassable and all railways shut down, all of it. How would anybody even move out of there?
And understanding that these seismic and volcanic events are cyclical, and you'll want to check out Upheaval, Why Catastrophic Earthquakes Will Soon Strike the United States. Leading experts in the geophysical effects of climate change make a strong case for a link between the sun's cycles of behavior with highly destructive earthquakes. The authors explain that when the sun goes into reduced energy phase, a grand solar minimum as we're entering right now, it produces colder weather and the worst earthquakes across the historical timelines. Included are easy-to-understand charts and graphs showing that we face an imminent threat. Find out the status of the threat for California, Alaska, South Carolina, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and many other states and regions across our planet. And if you want to support this broadcast, click the link in the description box below to Upheaval: Why Catastrophic Earthquakes Will Soon Strike the United States, available in both paperback and Kindle versions.
And Tokyo is a big place. They call it Dongjing, if you're talking about it in Chinese. It is huge. It'll take you about 1.5 hours just to go across the city underground on an MRT that doesn't stop for red lights. It just goes, How would you walk out of there? After a while, the ash would get in your boots and you'd be getting blisters and it'd be crazy trying to walk out of there. Could you ride a bicycle? Perhaps. Would it slip off the road? Any kind of rain would turn it into a mud pit. But the cities are so vast over there, the megalopolises, and they just one goes into the next, into the next, into the next. Like in the States, for example, in Europe too, it breaks. Like, you came out of one city and then there's nature and then you come into another city. Could be farmland or forest, but that there's a separation between the cities. There's a physical separation, like one ends and the next one begins. The suburbs. In these areas in Asia, the cities just run together indefinitely along rail lines and transportation hubs. For example, Taiwan, all the way from Taipei down to Kaohsiung, is one giant city. They have different names for sections of it, but it's just one giant city with 17 million people living along a coastline. How are people going to leave out of there? And so this is one thing that the Japanese government redacted from their report, which I don't know why they would redact that. They talk about all the causations of Mount Fuji. They talk about the repeating cycles of the eruptions. They talk about what happens when the eruption comes. They talk about where it would happen, where the ash fall would be, how far it would go away from the volcano, depending on wind. And even with wind blowing the other direction, they would still expect that much ash to fall in Tokyo. The only part of the report that you're not allowed to read is how the people are going to leave or how they're going to get food into them. And I really believe that there's something startling and shocking in there that would just make everybody shake their heads and just say, that's impossible. Okay, what if there's 35 million people living there and the only way to get out is walk or ride a bike? No public transport's working at all. If you have your own private car, it's probably going to clog and choke. Like we saw the same thing when people were trying to escape Fuego's eruption, the ash cloud coming down. Even though it was lighter in some areas, people's cars were stalling because the filters were plugged up. And the ones that were in the heavier ashfall that were actually on the road where you could see those scariest GoPro footage or whatever they were using, cameras in their cars, when the ash cloud got deep enough for them to block out the sun or make it really, really dark where you could look like it was almost twilight, their cars would just stop. It was instantly clogged up with ash. So you can't drive out of Tokyo, 35 million people. That's just Tokyo and Chiba the report's focused on. But you got to realize other periphery areas. Now, and what they didn't go into in the report either, which I thought they should have, if they did all the research, was let's say Tokyo gets a full 3 feet of ash. Where's the ash spread going to be around the rest of the country, and how much is that going to affect the other cities? Because Japan is dense with a capital D. Incredible country to travel to. You're going to have your mind blown wide open. It is such a time capsule up there. It is amazing the way they have held on to their culture and the way that things still revolve. That is such an amazing place to travel. I tell you what, Japan, put it on your list of places to go. We went up to Hokkaido. We've been down to Osaka, Kyoto, Okinawa. Great places. All Sapporo up there where they make the beer up in Hokkaido Island, Hakodate, and all these other places. Super cool. I think they didn't want to terrify the citizens, telling you what's going to happen if there's an eruption when people can't get out of that city. Are they looking at a death toll of like 20 million plus people that are just going to die in their apartments and live in that? They're not going to be able to get out of the city. See, that's the thing. It comes back to the preparedness. Now, let's say somebody's living in Tokyo and they're like, well, this grand solar minimum's here. The Tokyo government put out this report about everybody not being able to leave the cities because of too much ash. Maybe I should get 3 or 4 weeks worth of food and keep it in my apartment. Maybe I should get 2 months worth of food and keep it in my apartment. I could put it under the counters. I could put it under the sofa. I could find room under my desk. I could clean out some drawers, throw away some stuff, and make room. How about the closets? How about your balcony if you have one? You could store stuff. those people wouldn't have to leave their apartments. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you had that food, you really wouldn't have to open your doors and go outside to still stay alive, as long as you had electric or gas coming in where you could prepare food. Since we're in the same Asia area here, unprecedented drought in the Koreas kills millions of livestock and decimates crops. Totals unknown. We've seen this again, and this might be one of the reasons that Rocket Man or Kim Jong-un is up at the bargaining table. Now, this is a little bit of history for you. These last 3 years, North Korea went on a massive, and I mean massive, upgrade in its agriculture sector. It was funded mainly in part by the Chinese. But what they did was they rebuilt all the canals because so many of them were leaky that they were losing so much water that if they just would have repaired the canals, it would have tripled their water availability in the country. All right, so they let those canals go to oblivion. So they repaired all the canals. They got seed stock from China to plant wheat. They got new machinery. And I think the U.S. wants to get in there because imagine if John Deere tractors were able to get in and supply all the tractors for North Korea. But China's got a way huge head start advantage over there already on supplying machinery and equipment in. They built new processing factories. They gave them a bunch of machinery. They gave them new water pumps. They gave them a bunch of new irrigation within the fields. Kind of what you see in the U.S. where you have those drop-down pipes that are on the sprayer that goes around in a circle. With all that upgrade, they were still unable to bring their wheat harvest up or harvest of other things. They had a shortage in cabbage this year, too. And that's massive because, kimchi is part of the culture. And have a massive cabbage shortage. It'd be like a beef shortage in the U.S. There's no more beef. What would people do? They'd freak out. No more potatoes either. No potatoes and no beef in America. Sorry. It's kind of the equivalent if you didn't have cabbage in North Korea, South Korea. Massive drought over there, wiping out millions of farm animals. So you can see why the chicken prices have skyrocketed across Asia. Not only did they have the bird flu, which is spreading like wildfire, that would include everything from geese to turkeys to quail. These are the birds that we don't really typically think of in the West too much, but the quail has the egg, and that's a huge seller. You get these little tiny eggs. You can buy them for breakfast. Sometimes they cook them in this little quail egg cooker. They come out there like the size of a quarter if you're in the U.S., something like that, a larger denomination coin. And you can load up, 6, 8 of those things on some toast and make a little breakfast out of it. But most of us aren't familiar with raising quails to get the eggs. But over here, it's $1 billion business. Geese, duck eggs. I mean, how many of you have eaten a duck egg in the last year? The blue eggs, they taste really salty, those kind. You can find a duck egg almost everywhere you go in Asia. As common as you can find a chicken egg. Now, fresh, those are a little more difficult to find, but you can always find the cooked duck eggs right next to the cooked quail eggs, right next to the cooked chicken eggs. Your choice, 3 different. The farmers can't keep them because the feed's becoming too expensive for them, or they just outright died. And the migratory birds are all in different places that make no sense. The birds are scattered, literally. They're going to just different places where they don't normally go in their new migration patterns. They're just out-of-place birds everywhere. I have a lot of people write me talk about geoengineering. And there's a lot of reports out here. And I want to go back to Christian's report over the Ice Age farmer, where he was talking about, since the media has now declared the Earth has reached a tipping point, is heading towards a flaming hothouse apocalypse. I still don't know how they get away with the lies in the media like this. Harvard University chimes in with, only geoengineering can save us, but at the expense of our crops. But wait, geoengineering was supposed to move the water to help us grow more crops. So was that a bait and switch also? Geoengineering, that's a hot topic, and it's proven to be in play. It has been for years now. Particulate matter in the atmosphere, some call it cosmic radiation management to try to deflect, or when those galactic cosmic rays come in and strike that piece of nanometal in the sky, they lose their charge so they can't nucleate to create a new cloud. Some schools of thought say that we are so deep into the Grand Solar Minimum that if they stop the geoengineering program, the UV would wipe out our crops. We would have deluge rains on something like the 8,000-year event, 5,000-year event deluges if they stop the geoengineering programs. Others say we need it, man. We need to build more clouds in the sky so we can stop the runaway global warming. If we can make more clouds, we can deflect the sunlight and the planet will cool. Well, I don't think we need that. I think that'll be a disaster because we're already cooling anyway. And let me throw back the point. I want you to go to Dr. Roy Spencer's site. That's Dr. Roy, R-O-Y, Spencer, SPENCER.com, drroyspencer.com, and take a look at the global temperatures. Now, this comes from the satellite data, which the IPCC seems to use all the time to show it's more precise, so we can get down to 1,000th of a degree readings to show the planet warmed by 1,000th of a degree. IPCC loves to use the satellite data record to prove global warming. Well, Dr. Roy Spencer is the director of the University of Huntsville, Alabama data center set that is the satellite temperature set at UAH. You got RSS as well, remote sensing systems. These are the people who get the data from the satellites. They're the ones who show you the satellite data. It's the ones IPCC uses. And I tell you what, go to Dr. Roy Spencer and take a look at the global temperatures. It was warmer so many other times in the last 20 years that I really can't understand how the media is still able to get away with these lies of saying it's the hottest year ever, when it's clearly not. The only possible way that they can get away with saying this is using land-based temperature stations only.
TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. There's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. You know, microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
And there's been so much fraud with NOAA putting land-based temperature station records where there's no temperature stations in Africa. They were lambasted in 2016 for at least 20% of the all-time record high readings coming out of Africa had no temperature stations there. It was in Malawi, it was in Uganda, parts of Zaire, Zimbabwe, had no temperature stations where they were showing record heat. This was a major scandal, but no, nobody talked about it. Only the people on the fringe who talk about CO2 is not the climate driver, the sun is. That was where the discussion was, where the echo chamber was, hey, NOAA had no temperature stations calling all-time record heat, which skewed the entire year's record temperatures. And the only way it can possibly say it's record heat is by using land only, because when they use ocean temperatures, there's an enormous amount of the oceans across our planet that are cooling. So they can't use that either, because the cooling parts of our oceans are going to overwhelm the land-based heat to drive it cooler. And the Arctic, I guarantee you, it is not the warmest Arctic ever recorded. I mean, all the way through the entire melt season, it was below the 30-year average. That is the only possible way legally I think they can get away with saying it's the warmest year ever, is using fudged NOAA data coming off land-based only temperatures, because the satellite data is showing everything way different, because it takes into consideration land temperatures and surface temperatures of the ocean and the poles. Now, if you take all that into consideration, we're only 0.2 of a degree above the 30-year average. But if you're using land only, it shows something different, because they forgot all the cooling parts and the fake data coming out of non-existent temperature stations. And also where they put these temperature stations are at the end of airport landing runways, at the intersection of two 8-lane roads through a city. And you wonder how the temperatures are increasing. In a parking lot, in the center of a blacktop, asphalt-covered parking lot, temperature station right in the middle. Don't tell me people, when they start their engines next to the temperature station on a asphalt-covered parking lot, are not going to have an effect on the temperatures. So there's a concerted effort to mask the cooling on the planet. There's a concerted effort to mask the crop losses that are happening. And I encourage you to go to Fresh Plaza. It's like every other article on there is crop losses. Erratic seasons and extreme weather devastating crops around the world. Oh, gee, let me guess. Lettuce, pineapples, stone fruits, peaches, cherries, pumpkins, blueberries. Wait, that's just the first list. And then they go into some reasons behind that. They even go into some countries here. Pakistan, not a normal place we think about crop losses, but with all the heavy downpours and rains returning in areas, I did a whole video on that. Rains returning to all these ruins in the desert that used to be cities, but people left because there was no more water. Now these rivers are starting to refill amazingly right next to the abandoned cities. That is crazy anyway. But it's on a 3,600-year cycle because those cities were fully inhabited 3,600 years ago, and then they left and they're covered in sand now. There's just no more water. Fine. But it shows a repeating pattern. And then over in Europe, we got apricots, plums, walnuts, apples, peaches, grapes, mangoes in the south, olives, and grapes. 40% of India's mango crop wiped out. And it just keeps going on and on. And this is a lengthy article here. Grapes. I did want to talk about the grapes again. Indian grapes, Spanish grapes, Italian grapes. Everywhere you look, grapes, grapes, grapes. The whole world supply is down 40%, as well as plums due to frost and rainfall. Animals, difficulty. Fowl, difficulty. Wheat, difficulty. Soy, doing amazingly well. And you got to realize that where we're at in the amplification of this is just getting into what I would consider the extreme. The extreme will start right around 2019. And those 2 years, now mark this on your calendar, the 2 years from 2019 to 2021, these years are going to rip the shreds of our society apart. Insurance companies are going to go out of business. They won't be able to insure the losses anymore. When we come into these 2 years, it is going to be the most tumultuous 2 years of your lives in terms of economics, price increases, weather events, all kind of scattered news, completely scattered human psyche. It's going to be just a scatterfest and a freak out event going on this planet. If you know that's coming, again, that's the mental preparation. If you see this coming and you know the news is going to keep pushing this, they're going to do as much as they can in the news to try to create more divisive topics. They're going to try to spin anything they can to make people focus on that and start infighting. What they're not going to talk about is cooling global temperatures and your food prices, the reason they're rising. They're going to have to eventually report that they are rising, but they're not going to give a real reason why. They're just going to keep talking about the drought and the floods based on global warming, but they'll never talk about any other reasons. The amount of sea ice increasing as well. We're at the 7th lowest amount of sea ice. Just 2 years ago, we were at the 3rd lowest. We were predicted to go to less than 1 million square kilometers of ice, and everything would be ice-free, and the Northwest Passage and the Northeast Passage would all be open for shipping. And now they got to cancel summer cruises because they can't get enough icebreakers to run the cruises through the supposedly ice-free Arctic. So they canceled an enormous amount of summer cruises. Too much ice, not enough icebreakers. So I don't know how the media is going to start to spin this. They're trying to say now it's wind patterns pushing ice into areas that didn't normally have ice. And to expect, hey, according to the article, 10-foot thick sea ice in the middle of August is normal. According to this new article, right next to Greenland, it's normal. It's always, 10 feet thick in the Arctic summer ice. Now they're trying to shift the narrative. Well, all this super new, super incredible thick ice all over the Arctic pole and everything, it's all because of the wind. It's not because the water temperatures are cooling. It's not because the temperatures remain below normal the entire melt season. Go look at Polar Portal, P-O-L-A-R, Portal, P-O-R-T-A-L. Take a look at the ice mass budget that's on Polar Portal. Now, we were told it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. Like, we're going to get less ice, but now they're going to have to explain. So now they're saying it's wind responsible for more ice in the Arctic. But it's still because of CO2. I wish you the best of luck. Please check out the news. There's so many crop losses going on. It's going to be your responsibility to get ready for these changes. And they're about to go into hyper. You know how in a Ferrari, when you're switching gears, we're going from first gear into second and then from second into third from 2019 to 2021. We'll be flat out by 2022. The times between these changes are shortening. It's an exponential increase in effect coming from our sun. So I wish you the best of luck. And as I've said before, this is a different proxy to measure how close we are truly getting to the crop losses globally, where it will affect the greater economy as people spend more for food, and also as the food prices increase, the social unrest, the disgruntled public, shall we say, will also increase in numbers as they pay more for food, have less discretionary or disposable income, and this just resets our society as we know it. And as we move forward, when the crop losses come and people pay more for food, there's just going to be a lot of defaults on repayment, to the point where business globally will wake up and say, all right, we need a different mechanism to pay for everything and assure that we get paid when we deliver a good to country A, B, or C. All you have to do is use a history book to see what the future holds for us. The Maunder Minimum, M-A-U-N-D-E-R, the ORT Minimum, O-O-R-T, the Sporer, S-P-O-R-E-R Minimum. These are the more obscure minimums that you haven't heard. The Late Antique Little Ice Age. You need to take a look in history as to what happened then with trade and commerce. Even though it wasn't global at that time, it was definitely regional and multi-continental as well. But you need to take a look on how their commerce shrank and how the territories also shrank, how the dynasties or the empires of the times shrunk and collapsed on each other. What the time frame was when it started to when the changes first began due to food or lack of food, and how this affected the economy and ultimately how it affected the trade routes. And I don't care if you're even on the Silk Road 2,000 years ago, these grand solar minimums have been pounding China as well. So take a look at Chinese history. If you read Arabic and you can get into some older manuscripts and text, take a look in Arabic language, specifically the trading going on from the Middle East up to the Silk Road and over into Eastern Africa, and see how that shrunk as well. And you'll start to see this fingerprint pattern. It's just a repeat. And once you start to match it up, you can see it's always the same things. Wherever you go in history, you get huge volcanic eruptions, VEI 6, VEI 7, which is the volcanic explosivity index, really how large the eruption is, because it's called a VEI. And it'll be a 6 or a 7. That is due to the new Yale studies that have come out. They finally understood about the excitation of the magma chambers, which induce these larger volcanic eruptions when our magnetosphere weakens and we get this incredible increase in cosmic rays.
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.